The world's truly legendary victories do not always start from a position of absolute strength. Sometimes absolute triumph is forged in the darkest moments of complete and total defeat. Today we glimpse into the minds of history's most unbelievable historical comebacks. We will explore broken armies that crossed freezing rivers and exiled leaders who reclaimed massive empires. We will witness disgraced politicians who saved the world and imprisoned activists who forged a brand new nation. Finally, we will reveal an ancient emperor who completely rebuilt a shattered global superpower from absolute ashes. Before we dive in, please like and subscribe to Stickman Chronicles right now. Hitting that big subscribe button helps us bring you more high-quality history videos. Do not forget to turn on the notification bell for your daily history fix. Let us start our global journey in freezing North America with the absolute desperate comeback of George Washington. The terrifying situation unfolded as the massive British military completely crushed the early American rebel army across New York. Washington was forced into a miserable, freezing retreat, with his starving soldiers completely losing their psychological morale. The entire revolution was literally days away from absolute structural collapse as enlistment contracts expired. Instead of surrendering, Washington organized a highly dangerous midnight crossing over the completely ice-choked Delaware River. He marched his freezing soldiers through a blinding winter blizzard with their bare, bleeding feet wrapped in simple rags. They launched a massive surprise ambush on the elite Hessian mercenary garrison at Trenton, completely shocking the enemy. The sudden absolute victory completely restored the faith of the fractured nation and saved the entire independence movement. He proved that absolute tactical audacity in the face of total ruin can completely reverse the tide of history. Our next glimpse into legendary resilience erupts in the ancient Mediterranean with the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius. The massive Sassanid Persian Empire had completely overrun the Eastern Roman territories, capturing Jerusalem and stealing the true cross. The enemy armies were literally camped directly across the water from the capital city of Constantinople, threatening total annihilation. Instead of hiding behind his massive stone walls, Heraclius executed a brilliant and completely unexpected strategic gamble. He took absolute command of his remaining troops and sailed away from his besieged capital directly into enemy territory. He launched a highly destructive guerrilla campaign deep inside the Persian heartland, completely destroying their vital supply lines. He managed to absolutely shatter the massive Persian field armies, forcing their king to completely surrender and beg for peace. Heraclius successfully marched the sacred religious relics back into his capital after completely saving his empire from absolute extinction. He remains the ultimate historical masterclass in how an aggressive counterattack can completely save a dying nation. Moving to the modern political world, we find the terrifying and completely isolated wilderness years of Winston Churchill. He was a highly controversial British politician who was completely cast out of the ruling government for his aggressive views. He spent an entire decade in absolute political exile, while the massive threat of global fascism grew unchecked across Europe. When the Second World War broke out, the ruling government completely collapsed under the sheer horror of the Nazi blitzkrieg. The desperate nation suddenly turned to the exact same man they had completely rejected and mocked for 10 entire years. Churchill took absolute control of a completely broken nation that stood entirely alone against the greatest military machine in history. He utilized his unmatched mastery of the English language to completely mobilize the psychological courage of the entire British population. His absolute refusal to surrender transformed a catastrophic military disaster into the ultimate foundation for global victory. He proved that maintaining absolute ideological conviction can successfully resurrect a completely dead political career. The absolute destruction of personal legacy was challenged by the legendary athletic comeback of Muhammad Ali. He was completely stripped of his heavyweight boxing championship title and banned from the sport during his absolute physical prime. He lost over 3 years of his professional career simply for maintaining his absolute religious and political convictions against the draft. When he finally returned to the ring, many critics believed he was completely washed up and too slow to reclaim the throne. He faced the massive and seemingly invincible champion George Foreman in a historic rumble in the jungle in Zaire. Ali executed a highly dangerous psychological strategy known as the rope-a-dope by letting the massive champion punch him repeatedly. He completely exhausted his younger opponent before launching a sudden, devastating combination that knocked Foreman out completely. He reclaimed his absolute global crown, proving that tactical genius and mental endurance can overcome massive physical disadvantages. He completely bankrupted his critics and cemented his legacy as the absolute greatest athlete of the 20th century. Traveling to medieval Europe, we witnessed the breathtaking and highly miraculous comeback of the French nation led by Joan of Arc. The French royal military was completely broken after decades of massive defeats during the brutal 100 Years' War. The heavily armored English forces had completely surrounded the vital city of Orleans, threatening to conquer the entire country. Suddenly, a simple, illiterate teenage peasant girl arrived at the royal court, claiming she heard absolute divine voices of salvation. She convinced the desperate French prince to give her absolute command of a massive relief army marching to the siege. She rode directly into the brutal frontline combat wearing custom white armor and holding a massive holy banner. Her sheer, absolute, fearless presence completely shattered the psychological morale of the terrified English siege lines. She successfully lifted the siege in just 9 days, completely reversing a century of absolute military humiliation. Her incredible martial legacy was built entirely on pure, unyielding faith that resurrected an entire dying kingdom. Before we reveal the final 5 legendary historical comebacks, please like this video and subscribe to Stickman Chronicles. Your daily support helps us spend more time researching these incredible historical survival stories. Leave a comment right below about which epic comeback has shocked you the most so far. Deep in the rugged hills of ancient Gaul, a moment of absolute tactical brilliance emerges under the command of Julius Caesar. His Roman legions were attempting to completely pacify the region when a massive native rebellion trapped them at Alesia. Caesar ordered his engineers to build a massive wooden wall completely surrounding the enemy fortress to starve them out. Suddenly, a completely massive relief army of hundreds of thousands of angry Gallic warriors arrived to completely surround the Romans. Caesar found his army completely trapped in a deadly ring facing enemies from both the inside and the outside simultaneously. Instead of panicking, he ordered his exhausted men to build a second massive wooden wall facing completely outward. He personally drew his sword and wore his bright red cloak, leading desperate cavalry charges to plug the breaking defensive lines. His sheer tactical endurance completely broke both massive enemy armies, simultaneously securing absolute victory from the jaws of total defeat. He survived a literal double siege, proving that superior military engineering can overcome completely impossible numerical odds. The sheer horror of institutional oppression was completely shattered by the magnificent and peaceful comeback of Nelson Mandela. He was a highly educated lawyer and activist who fought desperately against the brutal and racist apartheid regime in South Africa. The ruling government labeled him an absolute terrorist and locked him inside a tiny concrete prison cell for 27 years. They completely intended for him to be entirely forgotten by history as he broke rocks in absolute miserable isolation. Instead, his unshakable dignity and absolute refusal to compromise turned him into a massive global symbol of resistance. When the oppressive regime finally crumbled under massive international pressure, they were forced to completely release him. Instead of demanding absolute violent revenge, he utilized incredible psychological forgiveness to completely unite the fractured nation. He was democratically elected as the brand new president of the exact same nation that had completely imprisoned him for decades. His unmatched political resurrection remains historically recognized as the absolute ultimate triumph of the human spirit. Across the vast landscape of Europe, the absolute most dramatic personal return belongs to the legendary Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. His massive global empire had completely collapsed, forcing him into humiliating exile on the tiny Mediterranean island of Elba. The victorious European kings completely restored the old, unpopular monarchy, believing the revolutionary nightmare was permanently over. Napoleon secretly slipped past the British naval blockade and landed on the southern coast of France with a tiny personal guard. The French king immediately dispatched a massive, heavily armed military regiment to completely arrest the escaping exile. Napoleon walked entirely alone toward the raised rifles of the soldiers and ripped open his coat, daring them to shoot their emperor. The soldiers instantly dropped their weapons, weeping tears of joy, and completely joined his marching army on the spot. He successfully marched directly into the capital city of Paris and reclaimed his absolute imperial throne without firing a single bullet. His legendary return, known as the 100 Days, completely terrified the global superpowers and reshaped the entire map of Europe. The blueprint of absolute survival was pushed to unimaginable limits by the polar explorer, Sir Ernest Shackleton. His massive wooden exploration ship, the Endurance, became completely trapped and crushed by shifting ice floes in Antarctica. His entire crew of 28 men was left completely stranded on the freezing, frozen ocean thousands of miles from civilization. They survived for over a year, living on the freezing ice, entirely isolated from the rest of human history. When the ice finally broke, Shackleton loaded his men into tiny open lifeboats to reach a desolate rocky island. He then took 5 men and sailed a tiny wooden boat across 800 miles of the absolute deadliest hurricane waters on Earth. He successfully navigated the massive freezing waves and climbed over uncharted frozen mountain ranges to find a whaling station. He immediately organized a rescue mission and returned to successfully save every single member of his stranded crew. His absolute leadership completely defied the laws of biological survival, turning a total disaster into an immortal legend. Finally, we arrive at the absolute peak of historical resurrection with the massive military campaigns of the Roman Emperor Aurelian. The Roman Empire was experiencing the absolute terrifying chaos of the 3rd century crisis, facing total structural collapse. The massive global superpower had completely fractured into 3 separate warring empires, suffering from plague and hyperinflation. Aurelian seized the throne and immediately utilized absolute martial discipline to completely rebuild the shattered military legions. He marched his armies at blinding speeds, completely annihilating massive barbarian invasions that threatened the capital city of Rome. He then marched east across the desert and completely defeated the breakaway Palmyrene Empire, capturing their warrior queen Zenobia. Without stopping to rest, he instantly marched his legions completely across the continent to crush the breakaway Gallic Empire in the west. In a mere 5 years, he completely stitched the shattered pieces of the Roman world back together through pure, unadulterated bloodshed. The Senate officially granted him the ultimate title of Restorer of the World for single-handedly saving Western civilization from absolute ruin. These gripping narratives prove that human resourcefulness can shatter the strongest chains on Earth completely. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe to Stickman Chronicles right now. See you tomorrow as we upload high-quality history videos every single day without fail.